I am going to go ahead and kick us off, introduce myself. I'm going to then pass it over to Julio to introduce himself, Home Lab and Lab Fellows, and then I will introduce Steve Flaim, and we will get us started today. Good morning. Good to see everybody. If you just are arriving, please use the chat. Go ahead and paste your LinkedIn profile in the chat or your website if you like. This is an opportunity for us to connect and network. So I want to see that chat light up. If you have questions throughout the next hour, please use the chat. Put your question in the chat. If you've just arrived, we're running this as a regular Zoom meeting, so you can all connect with each other as well. This is the program for today. I will go ahead and put that in the chat as well, in case you want to take a look at that on this page as well. You will see our speakers today and their LinkedIn profiles. So if you like, you can connect with them on LinkedIn as well. Jane and I have been working on this. So it feels like months, Julio. Jane and I have been working on this for quite some time. My name is Felena Hanson. I'm the founder of Hera Hub. Hera Hub is a co-working space and business accelerator. We are female focused and gender inclusive. We have 7 locations across the country, 1 here in La Jolla. I'm in Mission Valley today. We also have a North County, San Diego location, also Washington, D.C., Irvine, another Southern California location in Temecula, and a new location in Chicago. And as I mentioned before, we have 2 formal business accelerator programs. These are online programs for folks across the country, and we work with program partners to support these programs and allow folks to go through either free or very low cost. One is the Launch Academy for early stage businesses, and the other is the Growth Academy for growth stage businesses. And these are primarily non-technology companies that go through our accelerator programs. It's the accelerator for the rest of the businesses that don't fit into some of the other models as well.
Thank you so much, Felena. Also, really excited and thank you for co-hosting this and putting this together, and all those from the NIH team who will introduce themselves. So I am the executive director of the UCSD Center for Novel Therapeutics Accelerator, based right here on campus at UCSD. We call it the home of the disruptive biotech. We're really focused on spinning out early stage companies, primarily from faculty and grad students, but we are open to the community. We have about 60% of our startups are from UCSD, and then the balance of it is from the rest of the community. It really gives us a chance to rub elbows with some of the academic researchers who also are within the Center for Novel Therapeutics. My background, I'm a biochemist by training. I've spent time both at the bench and published some anti-cancer research, and then I've spent almost last 2 decades in the industry before starting Lab Fellows, which has become essentially Home Lab, and now we're powering these accelerators and incubators primarily in Southern California, and really focused on getting the UCSD accelerator going. We believe the best teams win, and the best teams are the most diverse teams. So we're really proud about that being something as part of our ethos. We think that allows us to not only show and project diversity, but also attract diversity. So a lot of our teams, a lot of the founders come from underrepresented backgrounds. The accelerator, what we're primarily doing is we have some funding set aside to do what we call due diligence projects. It allows us to give roughly a $25,000 grant to grad students, faculty, to take their project or their idea and start working towards that SBIR grant. They get that SBIR grant. We do have an accelerator fund that then does follow-on investments to match the SBIR, STTR phase 1 grants. And then from there, the goal is to continue to surround them with these wraparound services, mentors, advisors, and other resources to get them to that first private sector, either investment or partnership. A little bit about our accelerator. We provide the programming, those workshops, those mentors for a 12 to 18 month phase in the discovery phase. And then once they get that SBIR, they can actually join the accelerator phase of it, where we're trying to get them to that seed round investment. We provide the infrastructure. So one of the things that separates us is not only are we providing the programming, but we're also providing the wet lab and office space, as well as the ability to leverage the resources on campus. So our companies, all of our startups get access to UCSD resources, including the shared resources, as well as the UC contract for purchasing chemical reagents and equipment. So a lot of benefits from joining the accelerator and CNT over here. Our focuses were fairly modality agnostic, but we do love regenerative medicine and gene and cell therapies. But we are also broader. We're looking at sustainability, biomaterials, especially in the food tech world, animal health, and then we also are looking at kind of the lab of the future. So getting into some of the lab automation and the AI for drug discovery and these next generation test labs and biomanufacturing. Those are all interesting areas for us. I won't go too much more into this, but if you guys are interested, take a look at homelab.com for more information, and we'd be happy to share more about the program and what it takes to get into here.
All right, we are going to pass this over to Steve Flaim. Steve, I'm going to do a brief intro. You have an incredible resume, so we could go on for quite some time, but I'm going to give you all just the highlights of Steve's background. Steve Flaim is an investor in residence. Dr. Flaim is Chair Emeritus of the Board of Governors for the Tech Coast Angels. He is past president and chair emeritus of the San Diego network of Tech Coast Angels and emeritus director of the Angel Capital Association. He's also here with me in San Diego. He's a senior special advisor and investor in residence to the Office of Innovation and Commercialization at the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institutes of the NIH. He's also an entrepreneur in residence with the Small Business Education and Entrepreneurial Development Office in the Office of the Director of the NIH. And I will put Steve's LinkedIn profile in the chat here so you can get to know him. Steve, take it away.
Well, thank you, Felena. It's a real pleasure to be here with you all today. So I don't want to go into any more of my background. I think you've heard enough of that. Let's move on to the next slide, Stephanie. What I'd like to do is to kick things off. I'd like to get everybody sort of on the same page by reviewing the financing sources over the startup life cycle. And that's what we're doing with this slide here. And so just let me set the stage. So the vertical axis here is cash from revenues. And the horizontal axis, there's a white line sort of towards the middle, which starts on the left at the 0 point. And then there's a dark black line that sort of goes down and then comes back up again. And that is the cash from revenues line. And it starts out at 0. And as companies move from the very, very early stages into proof of concept and pre-seed, they are spending more money than they're making. So they're negative revenue. And as they move across the life cycle of the startup and into prototype and early stage, you can see that revenue line starts to come back up and it crosses the center line between early stage and later stage, between introduction and growth. And that's when companies become cash neutral and then they begin to earn money. So then they become cash positive. So a lot of, as you all probably know, a lot of early stage entrepreneurs who are coming out of academia, maybe they recognize that they have a product that could be a commercial opportunity. In order to move forward, they need funding. And so a lot of early stage entrepreneurs will self-fund. And you can see there's a stage in there on the left side where money is coming from themselves, potentially from accelerators like we just heard from Julio, maybe from crowdfunding sources, friends and family, and importantly, also potentially from government entities such as the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, Phase 1 SBIRs and STTR grants. And so this early revenue or this early income helps companies move from left to right at the early stage, and they're able to bring in non-dilutive capital and continue to build the company through the innovation and early sort of seed and startup and prototype stage. And you can see there's a green arrow there where the company maybe starts to have first revenues, where that black line starts to bend towards the vertical, starts to bend upwards essentially. And this area on the graph where the revenue is negative, this is what we all know as the valley of death. And so in order to get through the valley of death, obviously companies need to have some kind of source of funding. And so they potentially, a lot of them go to government entities such as NHLBI and NIH, National Science Foundation, and they get these non-dilutive grants, phase 1, and then move on to phase 2. And at some point, I think we all know that you cannot deliver a product to the market on government funding. You have to get to the point where you can attract private capital. And one of the things that we try to do is to help companies move from the SBIR, STTR funding sources to the point where they can actually go and speak to investors and attract investment from early stage investors. And that first set of investors are generally angel investors. And so as you heard, I've been involved in angel investing now for quite some time. And so I understand what angel investors are looking for in terms of investable companies. How do they recognize, how do they determine the companies that they want to invest in? And so once, if you're successful at angel investing money, angel investor capital, then you're able to move further to the right and eventually get to the point where potentially you can attract venture capital funding and potentially also attract strategic investors or strategic partners. And so that then becomes what many companies are able to do to sort of move their revenue line into the positive space. And eventually, if their company is really successful and they get to the later stages, they might actually IPO, or they could, in fact, get loans from banks at those later stages. But anyway, this is the sort of the ecosystem that we recognize as important. The moving from left to right, it's important to be able to attract this kind of funding. And so let's go to the next slide. What we know is that many entrepreneurs who are coming out of academia, for example, they're really excellent in basic research. They know how to generate the data, but they really don't know so much about how to do R&D for product development, how to reach out to and interact with the FDA, how to run clinical trials, and how to actually get regulatory approval. And they also really don't understand the market necessarily. And of course, as I mentioned, there's a lack of funding, and there's generally a lack of expertise, mostly on the business side, especially for academic investigators that are trying to move into this space. And they just really have a lack of resources. And so our office at the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, the Innovation and Commercialization Office, is there to help funded investigators to basically develop their academic innovation at an early stage, and then move into the small business innovation phase where now they're formed a company, and we help them and guide them on how to create businesses and how to move forward with the business development. And we're also we have a team of entrepreneurs themselves, and they're experts in various areas, and we're able to pull this team together to provide tailored support for companies as they move through this space. And the next slide. And so that team is an advisory group summarized here. So we have folks on the team who are expert in the very key areas that are necessary in order to move towards commercialization. So starting, I just want to mention on the left, we have John Su, who is a intellectual property expert, former U.S. Patent and Trademark Office individual, and he really understands what's necessary in order to build an IP portfolio that will support the development of a company. Next, we have Kwame Ulmer, who is a former FDA person with an expertise in regulatory affairs, and he's able to help guide companies on how to put together a strategy for working with the FDA and getting through the FDA hurdles that are necessary in order to get a product into clinical trials for testing. And then we have Kim Martin, who is an expert on clinical trials, and she can help companies think about how to design trials and what are the necessary steps to take there in order to create the data that's required for a product to get approved by the FDA. On the right side is Renee Arnold, who is an expert on health economics, outcomes research, and reimbursement. And a lot of early stage investigators don't really think about these features, but they're extremely important. You do need to have a plan for how your product is going to be sold and reimbursed and the value of that product. And that's absolutely necessary to have in order to attract private capital investment. And then finally, I'm the investor in resident in the office, and my expertise is advising companies on how to talk to early stage investors, angel investors, how to talk to venture capital investors and strategic partners. And so we can all come together around a company and provide them with coaching on how to reach out to investors, how to present to investors, and be sure that they have all these boxes checked that are really key features that need to be addressed in order to be successful at transitioning from government funding to private capital funding, which is absolutely necessary for business development. And so with that, I'm going to turn the podium over to Kathleen Rousche, who is the director of the Innovation and Commercialization Office at the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. And she will take it from there. Kathleen.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Steve. And thanks to Felena and Hera Hubs for hosting us today. So as Steve said, I direct the Innovation and Commercialization Office at the NHLBI, which is one of the 27 institutes or centers at the NIH. 24 of those institutes participate in the Small Business Program. So we share the mission of NIH to turn discovery to health, and we focus on finding solutions for heart, lung, blood, and sleep diseases and disorders. NHLBI has 4 main strategic goals, which our office supports, and we kind of have a special focus on advancing translational research and developing the workforce. Next slide. Our often mission, vision, and goals is on this next slide here. We try to help technologies advance forward towards products, and we envision having a community of innovators that are well-versed in technology development and commercialization. We want to identify and address unmet needs in our space, improve diversity in our programs, provide innovator training and education, and see our innovators and projects be successful as measured by having a positive impact on health and patients' lives. The next slide's an overview slide of our programs and services. And Steve mentioned some of this, but we have programs that support academic and small business innovators. We support academic proof of concept center networks, and we have product development programs such as CAT and CATALYZE that are open to both academics and small businesses. So this is outside of the formal congressionally mandated small business program that's listed in the middle. So the formal small business program, innovators can get awards, and then we have a lot of layer on programs that innovators can apply for that target both diversity and commercialization. So our office is really here to offer advice prior to applying, once you have your award during the project period. And then as Steve mentioned, we play a role in helping our innovators find connections and expand their networks to find non-federal development partners. So Steve touched on it already, but we're in a position to provide this tailored entrepreneurial education because of the team that Steve mentioned. Next slide, please, Steph. And this, Steve already went through the advisors and entrepreneurs and residents, but it's that expertise is really in areas where scientists aren't necessarily trained, but it's really important to move your technologies forward. So this team provides one-on-one consultation. Next click, please, Steph. One-on-one consultations. They provide, sorry, my slide got mixed up. They provide pitch coaching. You know, we'll support a company to go to a conference, and the team pitch coaches the company prior to getting in front of those potential partners. And then outside of those EIR staff, we have mentors that support the office by providing advice to our companies as well. I linked the Small Business Education and Entrepreneurial Development Office on the bottom of this slide because I wanted to make sure that you were aware there is an office that supports across the entire NIH's mission. They call themselves SEED. This office was modeled after our office, and they offer the same types of services. They have a whole team of entrepreneurs and residents that offer expertise as companies are moving their technologies forward. So that's a major resource as well, in particular if you're not in the heart, lung, blood, and sleep space. So I think that's it for me. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Stephanie Davis. She's going to go through many of our programs and services that companies have access to. Stephanie?
Thank you so much, Kathleen. So good morning to you all, and good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast. My name is Stephanie Davis. I am the Small Business Program Coordinator for the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. So you've heard Kathleen talk a little bit about the Innovation and Commercialization Office and our role in translating NHLBI supported technologies from the bench to the bedside. And I'm going to be going into a little more detail about the NHLBI Small Business Program. So just for those of you who are not aware of the Small Business Program or what it does, so the NIH supports two key programs that provide funding to small business concerns that are developing new technologies that are in line with the NIH mission. So the first program that I wanted to point out specifically is the SBIR, or Small Business Innovation Research Program. So this program is required for all federal agencies with R&D budgets greater than 100 million. And it provides grant and contract funding to small business concerns that are conducting R&D efforts and developing new technologies with the potential for commercialization. The sister program is called the Small Business Technology Transfer, or STTR program. This program is virtually identical to the SBIR program with a few key differences, one of which being the STTR program requires partnerships between small business concerns and US-based nonprofit research institutions. However, the end goal is the same, the development of new technologies that have the potential for commercialization and can help fulfill the NIH's mission. So Kathleen alluded to the NIH mission, which of course is to seek fundamental knowledge about the nature and behavior of living systems and the application of that knowledge to enhance health, lengthen life, and reduce illness and disability. So the NIH small business programs help advance this mission by providing support that can help de-risk these technologies that can help address illness and disability. So as I mentioned, the small business programs at the NIH are made up of both the SBIR and the STTR programs. And these programs have a similar end goal, and they are more alike than they are different. There are a few key differences, and these are outlined in the table on this slide. So in summary, SBIR grants will permit partnering with a US-based research institution, but this is not required. For STTR grants, it is required for the small business to partner with a US-based nonprofit research institution. There are different work requirements for SBIR and STTR grants, meaning a different portion of the budget needs to be can be or needs to be outsourced to parties other than the small business concern. So for SBIR grants, for early stage grantees, also known as phase 1 grantees, I'm going to get into what the phases mean shortly. The company can outsource up to 33% of the budget. For later stage companies, they can outsource up to 50%. For STTR grantees, there is a minimum work requirement for both the small business and the academic partner. For SBIR grants, the contact principal investigator needs to be primarily employed with the small business at the time of the award. For the STTR awardees, the contact PI can either be employed by the small business or the partnering academic institution. So for tenured faculty members or people who are working full-time at a US-based research institution, sometimes the STTR can be a very attractive option. And then the set-aside portions that go towards each of these programs are different. For SBIR grants, about 3.2% of our extramural budget goes to SBIRs, and 0.45% goes to STTR grants. That being said, even though the SBIR budget is bigger, we get proportional numbers of applications towards both of these programs. So we definitely recommend choosing the mechanism that fits best with your situation and your company situation. So what sorts of organizations are eligible for small business grants? So in order to be eligible for an SBIR or an STTR grant, these eligibility criteria are set by the Small Business Administration, and the company needs to fulfill the Small Business Administration's definition of a small business concern. Namely, they need to be an organized, for-profit, US-based business with 500 or fewer employees. SBIR grants, because the purpose of the program is to promote economic development and R&D within the US, there are, with very, very few rare exemptions, the work proposed under a small business grant does need to be done within the US. And in terms of ownership, there are some ownership requirements that small business concerns have to meet in order to get awarded. So at the time of the award, the company must be greater than 50% owned and operated by US citizens or permanent residents of the US. If that company is owned by another company or organization, that owning corporation must be at least 50% owned and operated by US citizens or permanent residents. And then this only applies to SBIR grantees, but if the small business concern is at least 50% owned and operated by multiple venture capital firms, that is fine so long as one firm does not have a majority share. And just as a reminder, these are all determined at the time of the awards. So if, for example, if a small business concern doesn't meet every single one of these criteria when they apply for a grant, that's fine. Just before the award is made, these criteria need to be met. So all small business grant applications are done electronically. And in order to submit a grant, the organization, namely the small business concern, needs to complete these 4 required registrations. We recommend getting started several weeks in advance, especially for the System for Award Management or SAM registration, just because this can take some processing time. And if you start these registrations a week before the deadline, most likely you're not going to get done in time to submit your award. And so most of the time we recommend that applicants submit via Assist, which is the NIH interface for grants.gov. Also, the grants.gov workspace is an option to submit your grant for companies that have submitted other small business grants to other agencies. Sometimes they prefer grants.gov because it is more familiar with. Additionally, the NHLBI does sometimes accept contract proposals as well. And for those submissions, we accept applications via the electronic contact proposal submission website. So Steve alluded to this in his presentation that showed the Valley of Death, but of course, small business grants, they can support activities ranging from the early stage proof of concept studies all the way up to early stage scale up and manufacturing. So what are some of the benefits to small business grants? So this is essentially free money for your company. When you apply and you get awarded, you don't need to pay it back. And it's non-dilutive. So the NIH does not take equity when they give out these grants. Additionally, the NIH is the largest source of early stage life science capital for biotech and medical device companies. And we're often willing to invest in very early stage innovations that angel investors, VC firms, and strategic partners are not willing to invest in yet because they're too risky. So this funding can be used to essentially de-risk your technology and also give you credibility, because when you get funded, it means that your application was reviewed by experts in the field. So it's a really great way to show that you are testing your innovation using sound science. I previously mentioned phase 1 and phase 2 small business grants. A common misconception is that these align with phase 1 and 2 clinical trials. They do not. So these refer more to the technology readiness of the product that's being developed under each of the awards. So phase 1 awards are mostly to support early stage proof of concept and feasibility studies. These are typically, they range from 6 months to 2 years in length, and typically they're just under $300,000 across the NIH. For the NHLBI, we have a limit of $300,000 total cost for most proposals. Phase 2 are going to support more extensive R&D efforts. These are 2 years on average, but can range from 1 to 3 years. And typically, the cost of these studies is just under $2 million. Additionally, there are some options outside the standard phase 1 and phase 2. There are what are known as fast track awards. I call them 2-for-1 specials because you're essentially getting 2 awards out of a single application. So what happens with a fast track is you'll apply for both the phase 1 and the phase 2 at the same time. And if you get funded, when you're finished with the phase 1 portion, you don't have to reapply for a phase 2. You can meet with your program officer and confirm that your phase 1 milestones were met, and then your company can transition to the phase 2 award without having to go through peer review again. So this is an attractive option for companies that might be a little more advanced than your average phase 1 applicant, but still don't want to go through peer review again and potentially face a funding gap. And then finally, direct to phase 2 is an option for SBIR mechanism only. This allows companies that have already conducted their early stage proof of concept work with non-federal funds to apply directly to a phase 2 instead of going through a phase 1. Additionally, there are some institutes and centers that participate in later stage funding opportunities called the Commercialization Readiness Pilot Program and the Phase 2B Competing Renewal Awards. So the NHLBI does participate in both of these, but it's strongly recommended that you reach out to the institute that you're interested in just to make sure that they participate, because not all of them do. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, but on average, it takes anywhere from 6 to 9 months between when you apply for your grant and when you actually get the notice of award. But when you submit your grant through Assist or grants.gov, it's going to get assigned by the Center for Scientific Review to an institute or center, and it's also going to get assigned to a review group known as a study section. So this study section is going to review your proposal based on its scientific merits, and for phase 2 and onward, also its commercial merits. And the results of this discussion are going to be put together into a document called the summary statement. So in addition to the summary statement, your application is going to get assigned a priority or an impact score. So the lower your score is, the better. So 10 is a perfect score. Typically at the NHLBI, you need to have a score between 10 and 40 to be considered for funding. So once all of these applications are scored, all of those applications that scored well will go to our advisory council, where the council will make broad funding recommendations for each funding cycle. And so all of those awards that council wants to fund are going to be put together on an approved funding list. And then before the notice of award goes out, the Small Business Concerns Contact PI is going to be contacted by their grants management representative, who's going to gather all of the documentation needed before the award goes out. But all of these steps are going to be the same no matter which institute you apply through, and it does take some time. So we highly recommend applying well in advance of when you think you're going to need the funds. So as I mentioned, the study sections will review your application. And so the review criteria for small business grants are listed as such. So first of all, the significance. So is this an invention that's going to address a real unmet clinical or scientific need? And is this something with commercial potential? Is there a market for your invention? Investigators. So more so than research project grants, such as R01s, small business grants are going to look at the overall company team rather than just the PI. So is this a well-rounded team? Do they have the appropriate scientific expertise and business expertise to successfully bring this product to market? Innovation. So is this a product that has some sort of significant advantage over the standard of care or competitors? Approach. Is the research study well designed? Is it going to prove feasibility? Are there any pitfalls? And if so, are these pitfalls addressed? And then the environment, which of course is going to be, does the company have the appropriate facilities and resources needed to carry out the proposal? So there are other review criteria that are not scored individually, but do factor into the final scores, and review considerations that are not factored into the overall score. But basically, all of these considerations are going to go into that priority score, which determines whether or not your application ends up going to council for that secondary review. So a lot of people who apply for small business grants either don't get funded upon their first submission, or worse yet, they don't get discussed. So I want to tell you all that this is very normal. It is more common for people to get funded after they resubmit a proposal, because this has given them a chance to respond to some of the constructive critiques left by the peer reviewers. So I wanted to just include two women founders who are leading NIH-funded companies, and they have shared their testimonials about why it is important to resubmit. But basically, my piece of advice for anybody who gets a less than stellar review is to, feel sad about it for a little bit, but then reach out to your program officer and work with them to develop a plan about how you're going to make your proposal even stronger for the resubmission. So we accept small business grants 3 dates a year. So the first one is January 5th, the next one is April 5th, and then the third is, which is the next one for us, September 5th. So this table just shows when you submit, when your application is likely to be reviewed, when it would in theory go to council, and when your project date would start. So the time between the due date and the start date vary for each of these cycles. For NHLBI, the shortest gap between the due date and the notice of award going out is for the January cycle. But for us, we have an 8-month gap for the April cycle. So what does the NHLBI support in our small business program? As our name probably gave you a hint, we're very interested in technologies that can help prevent, treat, and diagnose heart, lung, blood, and sleep-related diseases. So this pie chart on the on the left-hand side of the screen shows the different types of technologies that we fund. And this breakdown changes every year because we get different investigator-initiated proposals. But the point is that we have a lot of therapeutics, but we're also a very device-heavy institute. And we're more than willing to consider several different technology types as long as they align with our mission. And so in terms of the breakdown of what type of scientific areas do we fund, a little over 51% of our portfolio consists of cardiovascular-focused projects. About 31% is focused on lung projects. And as you could probably imagine, this amount has increased quite a bit over the past few years. About 16% of our portfolio focuses on blood and hematological disorders. And then about 2% focuses on sleep disorders and circadian biology. But once again, as long as it falls under this mission space, we are willing to consider it, with one very minor caveat. We do get a lot of questions about whether we support lung and blood cancers. We tend to focus more on non-oncologic blood and lung diseases. So for example, if you're developing a new drug for AML, it's actually going to go to our friends at the National Cancer Institute. So here are just some examples of disorders and diseases that we are interested in researching and treating within the NHLBI. And this doesn't have everything that we're interested. We do have a pretty huge focus on rare diseases as well. But if you have any questions about whether your technology or your indication falls under our mission space, please feel free to reach out and we can confirm that with you. So if you're listening to this webinar and you think, well, I'm developing a new drug or a device, but I don't think it's going to be of interest to the NHLBI, I wanted to point out a tool that I think is very useful. It's called NIH Reporter. So this is a public database of NIH-funded projects that you can use to basically see what the NIH is funding in this area. And you can use it to specifically filter out small business grants. And I've included the link in this presentation, so when everybody gets the slides, you'll be able to access NIH Reporter. Specifically, it has a module called Matchmaker, and Matchmaker is great because you can essentially take your executive summary and paste it in this box, and it will tell you how similar it is to other NIH-funded projects and which institutes are funding those projects. So for instance, if you put your executive summary in this box and most of the projects that you get that come back are funded by the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, this might be a clue that the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke might be interested in funding your project. And of course, Kathleen alluded to the SEED office. Their website has a lot of really fantastic resources for small business applicants. It's going to be at seed.nih.gov. And then if you are interested in getting in touch with some of my other colleagues who run the small business programs at other institutes and centers, feel free to scan the QR code. And then if you're not sure who you need to get in touch with, please feel free to reach out to us after the webinar. We can direct you to the right person. So most of the applications that we get are through these investigator-initiated broad funding opportunities called the omnibus solicitations. And that is why the proportion of technology types that we fund varies so much in a given year. So the new omnibus solicitations are coming soon. They are scheduled to be published in July, and these are the ones that follow the standard receipt dates. There are, however, some targeted solicitations that the NHLBI and other institutes may participate in. So the SEED office does have a list of these special funding opportunities, and it's recommended that if you have a technology that falls within the scope of one of these targeted solicitations, be sure to read the notice carefully, because sometimes these have different budget limits or different due dates. And of course, since they are targeted and specific, not all institutes are going to participate in them. So make sure you read them carefully so you know what's required. And so just here's an overview of some of the NHLBI targeted funding opportunity announcements. So several of these are notices of special interest, which are attached to the omnibus solicitations and indicate areas of high scientific priority. But we also participate in several RFAs that have set aside funds. So I wanted to specifically call out the Phase 2B bridge and small market programs. So these have a similar purpose. They are designed to give up to $3 million in extra funding to companies that have already gotten a Phase 2 SBIR or STTR award, so that this company can raise private capital and also reach their regulatory milestones. So these programs focus on, the bridge program focuses on pretty much any technology in our mission space, and the small market program focuses specifically on technologies for orphan indications and pediatric conditions. So these have a due date that's once a year. The next due date is going to be February 28th, 2024. We also participate in, as a secondary institute, in the HEAL Initiative small business RFAs. So these have set aside funds for technologies and non-addictive therapies for pain management. We're, of course, looking for pain management in heart, lung, blood, and sleep disorders. And then also the Innovations for Healthy Living RFA. This is a funding opportunity run by the National Institute for Minority Health and Health Disparities. And this one has set aside funds for companies that are developing devices, softwares, disease management tools, specifically to address disparities in heart, lung, blood, health disparities in heart, lung, blood, and sleep disorders. So if you have something that falls within the mission of some of these targeted notices of funding opportunity, we strongly recommend to check them out. So if you're new to the small business programs and you're seeking pre-application support, we do have two programs that we are participating in that provide pre-application assistance. One is the NIH Applicant Assistance Program. This provides 10 weeks of free coaching to individuals who have not, or whose companies have not previously received a small business grant. So this is a really great program for people who have great technologies but are very unfamiliar with the NIH grant submission process. And although it is not limited to women-owned or women-led companies, we really like to see applications from women-led and women-owned small businesses. And then also the HD Pre-App program is similar in scope to the NIH Applicant Assistance Program, but it is open to Phase 2 and fast track applicants as well. And this is specifically focused on companies that are developing a technology that can help address some sort of health disparity. So if you saw the Innovations for Healthy Living RFA and you thought, that is a great fit for my technology, you might want to consider applying to the pre-app program. Companies that get Phase 1 and Phase 2 awards can also request a limited allowance for activities that fall under the technical and business assistance or TABA umbrella. So these are activities that are not direct costs that are R&D related, but rather they are activities that can help with the commercialization and development of a product, and also help the company advance overall. So phase 1 applicants can request up to $6,500 in their application or after the fact through an administrative supplement. Phase 2 companies can request up to $50,000 in their application. Additionally, there are 2 seed office run programs called the Needs Assessment and Consulting Services Program to companies that did not request the funds in their application, but still want to take advantage of the TABA program. One program that is open to not only small business grantees, but also research project grantees and other awardees who are developing medical devices is the Concept to Clinic Commercializing Innovation, or C3I program. So the due date for the validation and execution program, which is the next deadline that's coming up, is actually going to be August 18th of 2023. And this provides up to 24 weeks of entrepreneurial training in 2 main segments. And if you're developing a medical device and you're interested in getting feedback from experts and receiving assistance in product development, I would strongly recommend applying to this program. We've gotten nothing but positive reception from companies that have participated, and the application process is pretty quick. If you're a current grantee and you're looking to hire new talent, the Administrative Supplement to Promote Diversity program is excellent. This is a really great way to not only bring on new talent and give a fantastic hands-on experience to an early career scientist, but also the purpose of this program is specifically to enhance the diversity of the NIH-supported workforce. So this program not only supports individuals who are members of groups that are mentioned in the NIH Notice of Diversity, but we also specifically support female candidates and candidates from socially and economically disadvantaged groups. So this program will cover the salary support and provide a limited allowance for travel and supplies to candidates ranging from high school students all the way up to research assistant professors. The key requirements are that the applicant organization must have an active small business grant. The candidate must be a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident. But we've had a lot of very, very talented candidates receive support through this program, and they've gone on to become permanent hires at the company. Some of them have reached the C-suite. Some of them have been the PIs on their grants. So it's a really fantastic program, and I'm happy to provide additional info if you're interested. And then the I-Corps at NIH program. Many of you on this webinar have probably heard of the NSF I-Corps program. So this is very similar, but it has more of a life science focus. Companies that have phase 1 or are in the early stages of their fast track grant will have 8 weeks to conduct 100 interviews to essentially determine whether or not their business plan is lining up with the needs of their customers and their potential market. So the next due date for this program is going to be November 15th, 2023. And companies that are selected get up to $55,000 that covers their course tuition and also travel expenses. The CARE program is a program that we recently began participating in this year. It's specifically an interagency collaboration between the NIH and the FDA. So it allows companies to be put in touch with FDA regulatory experts in case they have any questions that are related to their regulatory pathway or anything else that can help with their early stage product development. So this year we supported about 8 companies who wanted to get feedback from CDRH, and we're hoping to expand to CDER and CBER regulated technologies next year. As both Kathleen and Steve mentioned, our entrepreneurs in residence provide several amazing services to our grantees. They provide one-on-one consults. They can connect them with members of our mentor network and also prepare them for company showcase presentations at some of these conferences that are listed on the slide. If you are an early stage academic innovator, I strongly recommend looking to see if you're eligible for support from one of the NIH supported academic proof of concept networks. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about the REACH and the NCAI centers, but The NCAI program was started by our office, and that formed the basis for the REACH program. NCAI was more focused on heart, lung, blood, and sleep technologies, and REACH is the current program that provides support to technologies all across the NIH mission. And so these proof of concept centers provide early stage funding for academic innovators who might be interested in applying for small business grants in the future and need to do some initial de-risking of their technologies. And then finally, we have a program called the CATALYZE program. This is not a small business program, but it does support product development and product definition activities. And so if anybody is, if you have a product, but you don't have a company yet, I would strongly recommend checking out CATALYZE. The next deadline is going to be July 21st. And we have several different RFAs that support everything from therapeutics, devices, diagnostics, research tools, and enabling technologies for heart, lung, blood, and sleep research. And finally, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to our inbox here. I also recommend signing up for our newsletter if you want to be in the loop about any opportunities or programs that our office puts on. This is the first way to find out about them. And thank you all so much for listening. We are happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie. Really appreciate it. Okay, so we do have some questions. I'm going to take them in order as they came in. Heather, are you there? And if you want to come off mute or on camera to ask your questions, I'll give you a sec. There you are.
Hi, sorry, I was just about to type a different question.
You can ask all three.
I'm trying to remember what my first question was.
Your first question was, do you need to have received a grant to engage with the advisors?
Right, so that is the first one. I would love to, those seem like great experts. And so just, can we talk to them before even applying for a grant? And then I do have a second question.
Anybody can answer the first question, please?
That's a great question. So typically, just due to staff bandwidth, most of the services provided by our entrepreneurs and residents are available to small business grantees. But one common misconception that we have is that people think, like, for example, if they're a CATALYZE grantee or if they have an R01 funded by the NHLBI, a lot of people think that they're not allowed to engage with our experts. And actually, that's not true. The Innovation and Commercialization Office, although we primarily support small business grantees, we also support other translational researchers who may be interested in developing products.
Great.
And then my second question, just real quick, is that my company will be reorganizing from one state to another state. And so, but I'm unsure of the timing of that. So, but I'm all set up with my current company in the whole SAM system. So is it possible to apply through the current registrations, and then if an award was granted, have it shifted to the new company? Thanks.
That's a great question, Heather. I don't think it should be an issue. The SAM help desk should be able to answer that question a little bit more definitively than me, but I think as long as your registration is up to date, I think it should be okay.
Great. Awesome. And you had a third question, Heather. Do you want to ask that? We're working on digital health, IVD.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I did have a third question. I'm full of questions today. My second question or third question was just, we're working on a digital health and a diagnostic. And so, Stephanie, when you're going through the different areas that you fund, it seemed like there was this category and that category. So should we, sort of for a grant, apply for one or the other? Is that the best way, the best approach, or should we kind of, even though we think of our solution as one thing, should we apply separately?
That's a great question, Heather. So it really, that's one of those questions that doesn't really have a cut and dry answer. We can chat more about it offline. My biggest piece of advice is sometimes there is the question of how narrow should the focus of our proposal be? Should it be? I tend to be more of a proponent of having a more narrow focus, just because one of the most common critiques I see from the peer reviewers is an applicant, especially phase one applicants, they put together a proposal that the reviewers think is overly ambitious, and then they say there is no way it's going to get done with this proposed budget and this proposed time period. So remember that phase one especially, it's just for proof of concept. It's for initial de-risking. So the beautiful thing about us having multiple phases is that you don't have to get everything done in one. Sometimes you could just say, that is something we would like to do in our phase two, for example.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Anthony, you had a question. Are you able to pop off mute and ask your question? If not, I'll put it in the chat.
Again, hello.
Yep, perfect.
Yeah, it was about, okay, there was a point where it was said that you have to be 50% within your company, working in your company. But say I'm an academic and I own the company. I don't have any actual employment contract with myself. So how does that work?
Anthony, you sound like you'd be a good candidate for the STTR mechanism then. Because with an STTR, you don't have to be employed with your company to be the contact PI. You can be employed with the academic partner. So for example, if your university is the academic partner and you're employed with the university, then that's fine.
So, okay, I'm still confused. So, and someone who owns the company also has to, I guess, draw some sort of salary from the company or have some sort of contract written up. You know, like when I have a contract with myself that I work 20 hours a week or something, like how do you identify yourself as part of the company when you own it?
It's basically calculated using, basically confirming that, in a 40-hour work week, you work at least 21 hours with the company. And if you can't meet that requirement for the SBIR, you either have to find someone else who can, or you do the STTR mechanism.
And to meet that requirement, you typically submit some sort of contract you have with yourself or the company.
Yeah, and we can discuss this more offline.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, we've got a minute left. Christina, are you able to?
Sure, I'm here. I guess I just wanted to know what you think are some of the key differences between a standard sort of research grant like an R01 and R21 and these SBIR, STTR grants.
That's a great question, Christina. I actually, if you want to, I'm going to put my email in the chat. I have a Venn diagram that I did not include in this presentation, but I am more than happy to include it in the presentation that we send out afterwards. The key differences are, I would say, the focus of the grant. R01s, R21s are more discovery oriented. The goal of the study is to enhance scientific knowledge. For small business grants, it's product development. You are going to possibly add to the general field of in a given scientific area, but the end goal is to develop a product that can be commercialized. So the way that like the significance, innovation, investigator, environment, and approach are evaluated are going to be slightly different between those two.
Fantastic. Awesome. We are at the top of the hour. I know we have a couple more questions. I am capturing the chat, so I'll make sure any additional questions, like Ravi, I saw your question come through. We'll make sure that we get you connected with the right folks. Steve, somebody asked if you're able to meet with in person. Joel asked. So we'll make those notes. I really appreciate you all attending today and being part of this. Thanks to Jane for organizing this. Thanks to Julio for being part of this as well. Hopefully we'll be able to do more of these in the future. We appreciate all of you. Please stay in touch and enjoy your weekend. I will send this out to everybody who has registered. We'll get the slides and the recording out to everybody so you can go back and dive into the details. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Felena.
Thank you.
Thank you, Felena.
Enjoy your day. Take care. Bye.